Hi, I'm the son they kept hidden in plain sight. The one scrubbing floors in the same building my brother ran like a king. The one my father called a burden. The day I graduated. He thought I was powerless. He thought I was disposable. What he didn't know was that I owned more of the company than all of them combined. And when the CEO finally looked at me, not through me, he fired my brother. Right there, no warning, no ceremony, just silence. And their faces, drained of every last drop of certainty. You want to know how it got to that moment? The sun pressed down on the campus with a quiet kind of authority, warm but not harsh, the kind of heat that soaked into your gown and made you wish the speeches were shorter. Names were being called in alphabetical order, one after another, echoing off the old brick walls of the university quad. Every name that passed brought a wave of cheers, claps, and whistles from proud families scattered across the folding chairs. Some kids had whole cheering squads. I watched a girl 2 rows ahead leap into her father's arms after crossing the stage. He lifted her like she weighed nothing. Her mom cried. Her siblings screamed. I watched the moment play out like a movie I wasn't part of. I didn't expect that kind of fanfare. I didn't want balloons or a bouquet. A nod from my father, maybe. A quick, good job would have been enough. But when my name was called, I heard nothing but my shoes on the stage. No one stood. No camera flash. No proud smile waiting at the end. I walked off and joined the sea of black robes without looking around. Later, I found my dad waiting by the parking lot, leaning against the hood of his car like he had someplace more important to be. My older brother stood beside him, still in his suit from wherever he'd come from. He looked bored, as usual. Dad didn't waste time. "I'm not feeding a useless burden anymore," he said. No anger, just fact. Like he decided this months ago and was only now informing the person involved. I blinked. No one had spoken yet, not even congratulations, not even my name. He didn't ask how the ceremony went or what I planned next. Just that one sentence, standing in for every other thing a father might say. My brother snorted quietly, like he'd heard this all before and approved. "You'll start work Monday," Dad added, sliding into the driver's seat. "Harlan Industries. Janitorial." I paused beside the car door. "What?" He looked up at me like I was slow. "You need to learn what real work looks like. Be grateful I pulled strings to get you in." I didn't ask who he called. I already knew. He'd probably spoken to some mid-level manager at Harlan, the same company where my brother wore a title he didn't earn. The car ride was quiet. I sat in the back seat while my diploma, still warm from the ceremony, lay across my lap in a flimsy blue folder. No one asked to see it. "At a red light," Dad said without turning around. "Don't embarrass me. Just do your job, keep your head down, and don't expect anything more." I looked at my brother's reflection in the side mirror. He didn't even flinch. No smirk, no guilt, just silence. The building came into view downtown. Harlan Industries, glass and steel stacked high with flags fluttering above the main entrance. I'd seen pictures, but never thought this would be my introduction to it. Not like this. As we pulled into the side lot, my hands tightened around the folder. I hadn't spoken a word since graduation ended. My mind was working in slow motion, like someone had hit mute on my entire life. I thought about saying something. Anything. But the truth was, I didn't have a defense, not one they'd care to hear. I was the quiet one, the soft one, the kid who didn't make trouble and didn't make waves. And maybe that made it easier for them to decide my life without asking. I slid the folder into my backpack, zipped it shut, and kept my mouth closed. Dad parked, then pointed toward the front steps like a coach sending in a backup player. "I'll text you the supervisor's name. Be early." I got out. The pavement under my shoes felt hotter than before. The building rose above me, reflective windows hiding whatever came next. I stared at those doors for a long moment. No one followed me out of the car. This wasn't a conversation. It wasn't a choice. It was a sentence. And when I took that first step toward the building, I didn't know it yet, but something in me had already changed. Quietly. Permanently. I thought the worst part was over when I walked through those doors. I was wrong. The lobby smelled like lemon polish and cold ambition. Bright, clean floors stretched underfoot, their sheen interrupted only by the soft clicks of designer heels and the low hum of distant conversation. Every surface gleamed like it had something to prove. I stood near the security desk, still in the same shirt from the ceremony, now wrinkled from the car ride. "Temporary badge," the man behind the desk muttered, sliding a laminated pass toward me. No photo, no last name, just facilities temp. No one looked me in the eye. I clipped the badge to my shirt and stepped aside as a woman in a navy suit brushed past me, her phone tucked between her ear and shoulder. "If legal pushes back again, loop me in before lunch," she said, without pausing. She didn't even notice I was there. A minute later, a guy with a tight haircut and a radio on his belt approached. "You're the new one. Janitorial?" I nodded. "Follow me. You'll be shadowing today." His name was Mitch. No smile, no handshake, just a clipboard and a quick glance over his shoulder to make sure I was keeping up. He walked me through the lower floors first, the service corridors, supply closets, where we dumped trash and picked up carts. Floors 2 through 5 are standard. Exec level is 10. Stay off 10 unless assigned. I didn't ask why. I already knew. "Some floors don't need much," Mitch added. "You'll figure out which ones matter." Which ones matter? I knew that line. It wasn't about dust or trash. It was about people whose mess could be ignored and whose couldn't. By the time we got to floor 7, I was pushing a gray cart stocked with cleaners, gloves, rags. I moved silently behind Mitch as he gave half-hearted instructions. "Don't mop during high traffic. Don't talk unless spoken to. Don't linger in front of glass doors." It wasn't a rule book. It was a warning. I kept my head down as we passed sleek offices and padded conference rooms. Inside one, I spotted my brother. He stood with a group near the window, shirt cuffed just so, hair like he'd just stepped out of a commercial. He was laughing, not just chuckling, full, confident laughter, the kind that told the room he belonged there. "Yeah, Nate's one of our rising stars," someone said to a visiting exec. "Smart, ambitious, knows how to handle things." Nate. That's what they called him here. Not son, not brother. Just Nate, the guy whose future they were betting on. His eyes flicked toward me once, then moved on, like I was a chair. A few minutes later, one of the men in the group pointed toward a spill in the hallway. "Facilities can take care of that," he said, glancing my way like I'd appeared out of nowhere. Facilities, not he, not even that guy. It was strange how quickly a person could become a role, a noun, a job title. Mitch didn't flinch. He handed me a towel. I wiped the floor in silence while the conversation continued feet away, as if I were part of the decor. By now, the badge clipped to my shirt felt heavier than it should. I finished the task, stood, and adjusted my grip on the cart. One of the execs had stepped back just enough to block the hallway. I waited. He didn't move. Not right away. Eventually, I said quietly, "Excuse me." He blinked, surprised I could speak, then stepped aside. Back at the service elevator, I leaned against the wall as the doors slid shut. I didn't let myself feel much. Not anger, not sadness. Just a kind of stillness, like watching your own life from a few feet away. This job was supposed to be temporary. That's what I kept telling myself. Temporary, like a cold. Temporary, like rain. But I knew. I knew the difference between temporary and intended to stay that way unless you fight it. The elevator reached the ground floor. I pushed the cart back to the storage area, signed the clipboard Mitch handed me, and walked toward the employee exit near the loading dock. Through the glass, I could see the main lobby again. And there, across the way, my brother was shaking hands with someone important. Another suit, another name. They looked through me like glass. I turned away, but before the door closed behind me, I caught my reflection in the stainless steel elevator panel. It stayed there after I walked out, a faint, unfinished outline. That night, I finally let myself remember how long I'd been trained to disappear. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt intentional, like the walls were holding their breath. I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door, kicked off my shoes, and stood there longer than necessary, letting the day loosen its grip. My shoulders ached. My hands smelled faintly of disinfectant. No matter how many times I washed them at the sink, I didn't bother with dinner. I poured a glass of water, carried it to the small kitchen table, and sat down. For a moment, I just stared at the empty chair across from me. No one to explain myself to. No one to impress. From my backpack, I took out the blue folder. I didn't open it right away. I set it flat on the table, squared the edges, and rested my palms on either side like it might slide away if I didn't anchor it. The silence pressed closer than it had all evening. At work, noise had filled every gap. Here, there was nothing to hide behind. I'd been tired all day, but now my mind wouldn't slow down. Scenes replayed without my permission. The lobby, the badge, my brother's laugh drifting down the hall like it belonged there more than I ever would. This was the part people never understood. They saw the quiet and assumed weakness. They asked, sometimes kindly, why I didn't push back harder, why I didn't speak up. The truth was simpler and heavier. I'd learned early that silence worked. Growing up, I was the youngest, the easy one, the kid who didn't need much because I didn't ask for it. My parents liked that about me. It made things smoother. When my brother acted out, the room revolved around him. When I stayed quiet, it felt like relief. I wasn't ignored exactly. I was managed. If I brought home a good report card, my father nodded and said, "That's expected." If my brother did the same, it became a story retold at dinner, then to relatives, then to anyone who'd listen. His achievements traveled. Mine stayed put. I told myself, that was fine. I learned to measure success privately. I stopped looking for reactions. One memory kept resurfacing as I sat there. I couldn't remember how old I was, just the feeling of standing in the living room, holding something I'd worked on for weeks. I'd been proud in a careful way, already rehearsing how to downplay it. My father glanced at it, then at the television. "That's nice," he said, distracted. "Put it somewhere safe." That was it. No insult, no praise, just a dismissal so gentle it took years to recognize it for what it was. I remember shrinking back, not because I was hurt, but because I understood something important. If I made less noise, I took up less space. And if I took up less space, things went more smoothly. That lesson stayed with me longer than any rule. Not every memory was like that. There was one moment that cut against the pattern. It wasn't in our house. It was outside it, which might be why it mattered. I'd stayed late one afternoon to help a neighbor fix a broken fence. When we finished, he wiped his hands on his jeans and said, "You did good work. You didn't rush it." That was all. No applause, no ceremony, just recognition. It landed deeper than I expected. I carried it with me longer than all the careless comments combined. Back at the table, I finally opened the blue folder. The diploma stared back, official and quiet. Proof of something I'd earned without ever being taught how to celebrate it. I realized then that what happened at the building earlier wasn't new. It was familiar. Too familiar. Today hadn't created the pattern. It had exposed it. I closed the folder, not gently this time. The sound was sharper than I intended, and it startled me. I sat back and exhaled, feeling the weight of a realization I'd avoided for years. Endurance had a cost, and I'd never added it up. The next morning, I learned how public silence can become its own kind of punishment. I'd woken up early, long before my alarm buzzed. The city outside was still stretching awake, quiet enough that I could hear the faucet drip in the bathroom. I got dressed in the same gray uniform I'd folded the night before. Neat, practical, nothing that called attention to itself. It fit too well with everything I'd been taught to be. By 7:45, I was already at the building's back entrance. No one entered through this side except delivery drivers and maintenance staff. A guard gave me a curt nod as I passed, scanning my temp badge. No words exchanged, just a beep and a metal turnstile. The day started like the one before. I emptied waste bins, wiped fingerprints from glass doors, and mopped corners that no one else noticed. The physical part didn't bother me. It was clean work, honest. But what gnawed at me was how invisible I remained. People stepped around me like I was part of the architecture, like a coat rack or a potted plant that moved. By mid-morning, I was refilling paper towels in the break room when the air shifted. It wasn't loud, just a voice floating over a conversation between suits waiting for coffee. A woman in a pencil skirt, balancing a phone and folder, smiled at the group, then turned toward me. "Make yourself useful and grab a trash bag from the corner," she said lightly, like asking someone to pass the salt. Her tone was sweet, casual. So was the laugh that followed. 2 others chuckled, just enough to let me know they'd heard. No one corrected her. No one thought it needed correcting. I froze. Not entirely, but enough that my hand paused halfway toward the cabinet. I could feel my face heating, my back tightening, every part of me telling me to move and forget it happened. But my mind didn't let it go. Not this time. She hadn't said it to be cruel. That's what made it worse. She'd said it because she believed it was appropriate, efficient even. Like I wasn't a person, but an option. Just one more function in the office machine. I did as I was told. Quietly. No eye contact. Just movement. The same reflex I'd spent a lifetime perfecting. As I turned to leave the break room, I caught the faint sound of someone clearing their throat nearby. I looked up and saw my brother down the hallway, standing just outside one of the glass conference rooms. He had a clear view of what had just happened. Our eyes met, briefly. He didn't look away, but he didn't move either. He could have stepped in. Even something small, and "I'll handle it." Or, "He's already working on something." He could have reminded them I had a name, that I was more than a tool, but he didn't. He adjusted his jacket sleeve, turned his head, and walked into the room, the door clicking shut behind him. That moment stung more than the woman's words, not because I expected anything noble, but because he made a choice, a conscious, calculated one, and I realized just how comfortable he was with who I'd been assigned to be. Back in the corridor, I finished emptying a bin with more precision than it needed. My movements slowed, deliberate. I focused on keeping the bag from rustling too loud, the metal lid from clanging when I set it down. I didn't want to give them any more reason to look at me, but the damage was done. For the first time, I was seen. Not as a stranger passing by, not even as a brother, just as someone convenient, someone who didn't speak, someone useful. And the part that made my stomach twist? That's exactly how they liked it. I had a dozen responses lined up in my mind, words I could have said that would have burned clean through the air. But I said none of them, not because I believed I was beneath them, but because I'd lived long enough to know silence was still safer than starting a fire no one planned to help me put out. By noon, I was restocking paper in the printer room, hands moving on autopilot. My mind, though, was miles away, running over the same phrase. Make yourself useful. A sentence that sounded harmless, unless you were the one it was used on. I clenched my jaw tighter than necessary, and for the first time in a long while, I felt it crack just a little. That was the moment I realized silence wasn't protecting me anymore. And once you realize that, you start noticing all the places where your quiet has cost you. By late afternoon, the air inside the building felt cooler than usual. Or maybe it was just me, bracing for the long hours ahead. My shift was nearing its end when one of the admin assistants, young, always glued to her phone, flagged me down by the elevators. "Hey, could you drop these off at Records? I'm swamped," she said, handing over a sealed brown folder like it weighed nothing. "It's down by compliance. First hallway past the printer room. You'll figure it out." I took it without asking questions. Nobody thanked me. Nobody waited to see if I'd understood. They just moved on. The records office was tucked away in a quiet corner of the building that felt like it belonged to another era. Muted lighting, beige walls, the faint hum of machines sorting paper no one would ever look at again. It smelled like toner and carpet cleaner. No one was at the front desk when I walked in. A small printed sign read, "Back in 5 minutes." So I waited, standing by the wall, holding the folder. That's when I saw it. On the return cart just beside the counter, half buried under a stack of audit forms, was a file with my last name on the corner tab, typed, not handwritten. I wasn't looking for it. I hadn't even meant to glance there. But something about the font, the layout, it looked official, different. I shifted the pile slightly to read it more clearly. My full name was listed at the top, followed by a string of job codes, salary tables, and a header I wasn't prepared for. Candidate Evaluation Summary, LDP track. I blinked. LDP, Leadership Development Program. That was my brother's track. I scanned the next few lines. The timestamp was old, nearly 6 months back. There were no signatures, no flashy seals, just a cold block of corporate language. But what it said? It said I'd qualified. I wasn't confused. I wasn't mistaken. My name, my GPA, my internship record, my evaluations from undergrad, all compiled into a clean, impersonal paragraph stating that I'd met the metrics, surpassed them in some areas. Then, at the bottom, decision not advanced, slot redirected to preferred internal candidate J. Whitmore. Preferred, not better, not more qualified, just preferred. I read it again, slower this time. The room felt smaller. My fingers didn't tremble. I didn't feel dizzy or sick. I just stood there, more awake than I had been in weeks. I knew what this meant. Not just about the job, about everything. I hadn't been overlooked because I failed. I'd been rerouted because someone else wanted the space I'd earned. That someone had my last name. I looked toward the hallway. Still no one. I didn't take a picture. I didn't steal it. I slipped the paper back under the stack exactly as I'd found it, smoothed the edges, straightened the pile. No sign I'd been there. Because now I had something better than proof. I had clarity. That night, back at the apartment, I left the lights off for a while. The window caught the fading orange of the sunset and stretched it across the kitchen tiles. I dropped my keys in the bowl, toed off my shoes, and reached for the blue folder sitting in its usual spot on the table. Instead of opening it right away, I sat for a minute. Let the silence settle. Let myself feel it. When I did open it, I didn't flip through the pages like I used to, half looking, half hoping something would feel real. I knew now that every line in it was real. My diploma, my effort, my name. The problem wasn't what I'd done. It was what they'd refused to see. And for the first time, that truth didn't ache. It didn't make me want to explain myself, or argue, or beg for understanding. It just settled into me like weight into earth. I closed the folder firmly this time. Instead of putting it back in the drawer, I placed it on the bookshelf, right in the open, visible, mine. That moment didn't feel triumphant, but it did feel clean. I knew now who I was, and I knew who they decided I couldn't be. I didn't need to correct them. Not yet. The next day, I finally said something out loud, and everything shifted. I woke up before the alarm went off, not out of anxiety, but because my mind was unusually clear. The air in my apartment was still, heavy with that quiet kind of anticipation you feel before a storm. I moved through my morning routine like muscle memory, brushed my teeth, laced up my work shoes, packed a small lunch that I probably wouldn't eat, but I wasn't dragging myself out the door like I had the day before. On the surface, I looked exactly the same. Same uniform, same beat-up thermos in hand, same ID clipped to my shirt, first name only. But something in me had changed. Subtle, maybe, but real. I walked through the glass lobby of the building and caught my reflection in the security desk's polished counter. I didn't avoid my own eyes this time. I didn't shrink. I didn't brace for anything. I simply showed up. The service corridor on the first floor still smelled faintly of ammonia and damp concrete. I unlocked the janitor's closet, pulled out my cart, and got to work like any other Tuesday. The hum of the vending machine down the hall, the clatter of elevator doors opening and closing, even the occasional click of high heels on tile. It was all background noise now, but I wasn't in the background anymore. Around 10:30, I was in the break area on the second floor, wiping down counters while a small group gathered near the microwave. They were laughing about something, someone's weekend mishap with a golf cart, I think, and didn't acknowledge me when I walked in. I wasn't surprised. People usually don't stop the show for the lighting crew. Then it happened. One of the men, a guy from procurement, turned toward me without looking directly at me and said, "You should be grateful to have a place here. A lot of people would kill for a job right now." He didn't say it like it was advice. He said it like it was final. The words hung in the air longer than they should have. I looked up from the rag in my hand. He was still facing the others, still laughing. The room didn't go quiet, but it shifted. You could feel it. One of those half-second moments where people decide whether to keep pretending they didn't hear it or not. I stepped forward, not dramatically, just enough to be seen. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask him to repeat himself. I just said, "Respect isn't something you hand out with a paycheck." He turned toward me then, like he hadn't expected me to respond at all. His eyebrows twitched upward, just slightly. I held his gaze, calm, neutral, like I was offering a truth, not starting a fight. Nobody spoke. One woman coughed into her hand, and someone else reached for their coffee like it suddenly needed stirring. He gave a short laugh, awkward, forced, and turned back to the microwave like I hadn't spoken at all. But I saw it in his shoulders. I saw the small, rigid square his back became. He wasn't used to being answered. I didn't linger. I wiped the counter clean, collected my spray bottle, and walked out with my head high. I didn't apologize. 2 hours later, I was reassigned. No explanation, no tone in the voice of the supervisor who relayed the message, just a clipped, "They want you over in the West Wing this afternoon." That was warehouse storage. Forgotten space. Fluorescent lights flickering overhead, dust thick in the corners, cobwebs on ceiling pipes. The kind of place where nobody noticed if you were missing, let alone mistreated. My cart had already been wheeled there by the time I arrived. They wanted me isolated, not disciplined, watched. That's the difference when you stop following the unspoken rules. They don't punish you with noise. They punish you with silence, with inconvenience, with a vague tightening of the noose you didn't even know was there until you tugged at it. I moved through the storage wing carefully, deliberately. My hands scrubbed the edges of file cabinets no one had touched in months, but my mind was still back in that break room, replaying, not the comment, but my response. I didn't regret it. Mid-afternoon, as I pushed my cart past the elevators near the executive floor, I spotted my brother standing with a group just outside a glass-walled conference room. He looked polished, like always. Collar straight, blazer sharp. That easy laugh he uses when people around him are trying too hard to impress him. He saw me. I know he did. His expression didn't change. But something in his posture, something small, like the way he shifted his weight, said he'd heard what happened. He didn't come over, didn't say anything. Not even the silent nod of acknowledgement he used to give when no one was looking. Just turned back to his circle and resumed his conversation like I wasn't there. That was the confirmation, not the wound. By the time I clocked out, my list of assignments had grown by 30%. More restrooms, more floors, more duties that weren't mine yesterday. The clipboard waiting by the locker room wasn't subtle about it. The initials next to the changes weren't mine, but I finished everything. On time. No complaints. Because I knew the shift wasn't about the tasks. It was about testing me. Back in my apartment that evening, I sat by the kitchen table. The blue folder lay where I'd left it, centered, visible, no longer hidden behind bills or buried in the junk drawer. I didn't open it again that night. I didn't need to. What I'd found in that building, the data, the numbers, the proof of where I stood versus where I was told I belonged, it had settled into my bones like cold air. Not painful, not sudden, just there. Undeniable. And the look on that man's face earlier, the moment he realized I wasn't going to laugh it off or lower my head, was worth more than the paycheck that would follow. I had said no. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made a scene, but I'd drawn a line. And lines once drawn don't disappear just because someone refuses to see them. 2 mornings passed. I kept quiet. Not withdrawn, quiet. There's a difference. When I walked through the main lobby that Thursday, I didn't need to look around to know something had shifted. You can feel it in how the air moves when you enter a room. Slower, thicker, like everyone's waiting for something they won't admit. The receptionist, the one who used to smile without looking up, actually made eye contact this time, then quickly looked away. The security guard offered a tighter nod than usual. Small things. But when you've spent most of your adult life being overlooked, even a shift in posture feels loud. The elevator doors opened, and as I stepped in with two other employees from accounting, their conversation clipped off mid-sentence. They stared forward. One of them cleared her throat and began humming faintly, off-key and too fast. I wasn't angry. I wasn't nervous. I was noticing. It wasn't just their silence. It was the way people watched without watching. Like I had become a piece of moving furniture they couldn't quite place anymore. By mid-morning, I was cleaning a rarely used stairwell between the third and fourth floors. One of those gray-painted fire escapes no one ever uses unless the elevators stall or someone burns popcorn in the break room. It's quiet there. The kind of quiet you can think in. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Not a call. Just a calendar alert. 11:15 a.m. Walkthrough. I hadn't scheduled that, but I knew what it meant. Sure enough, 15 minutes later, my supervisor, Darren, showed up near the records office with two other staffers. Clipboard in hand, practiced neutral face, fake casual tone. "Hey, just a quick check-in, and nothing big," he said. That's how it always starts. Nothing big. He flipped a page and glanced down. I had a note here. Someone raised a concern. Not a formal thing, just wondering what areas you've been covering lately. Seemed like you were seen near a few sensitive zones. I kept my posture even, met his eyes calmly. I go where I'm assigned. No more, no less. He hesitated. Sure, of course. No issue, really. Just keeping track. Some folks were curious. Some folks. That's code. Nobody ever names names when the goal isn't clarity, it's pressure. I don't schedule my routes, I replied. You do. His mouth tightened just slightly at the corners. Then he nodded and turned away, like that closed the book on the moment. But I knew better. It was starting. By the time I returned my cart to the service bay at noon, the tone of the building had fully changed. Not chaotic, not loud, just alert. Like a dog sensing an earthquake long before the ground starts to shake. I kept my focus. Tasks done precisely but not hurried. No talking unless necessary. No defending what didn't need defending. Explaining yourself is the same as offering yourself up. And that's not what I came here to do. It was after lunch, maybe around 1:30, when I passed near the executive floor. I had a stack of supply invoices to drop off at logistics, which just happened to be 2 doors down from the C-suite corner. I didn't expect to see him, the CEO. He was walking down the corridor alone. No assistant, no entourage. Just him, a phone in one hand, coffee in the other. He looked up. Our eyes met. And this time, he didn't look through me. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. He didn't rush past. He just paused. Half a second, maybe less, but long enough to register me. Not like an object, like a variable. And then he walked on. It should have been nothing. Most people would have missed it. But I felt it in my chest like a knock from the inside. He'd heard something. Someone upstairs had noticed the tremor, even if they hadn't felt the quake yet. I continued on, dropped off the invoices, and made my way back down the north stairwell. Every step echoed louder than it should have. Not because the building was quiet, but because my mind wasn't racing anymore. I wasn't imagining it. The shift, the scrutiny, the subtle isolation that followed my first stand. They weren't just watching now. They were weighing. And I realized something. Something I wish I'd known years ago. Power doesn't respond to noise. It responds to patterns, inconsistencies, things that don't line up on a spreadsheet or in a meeting summary. You don't need to shout to draw attention. You just need to stop playing along. That's what I'd done. Stopped playing along. I finished the rest of my shift without reacting to any of it. The narrowed glances, the awkward sidesteps in hallways, the conversations that trailed off the second I passed through a doorway. I didn't need confirmation. I already had it. And while the pressure hadn't gone away, not by a long shot, it didn't feel as heavy anymore. Because now, it wasn't pressing from just one side. The tension was shared. They were nervous. They just didn't know how much. And that was exactly how I needed it to be. It was late morning, maybe a little before 11, when I got the call. Not a phone call. A message through internal dispatch. Pause your current assignment. Please report to conference room 4B on the executive floor. Bring nothing. No explanation. No hint of urgency. But everyone in that building knows what it means when you're told to bring nothing. I took the long way up, not because I was stalling, but because I wanted time to prepare myself, not my words, my posture, my breathing, the things you can't fake when you're being watched by people who expect you to shrink. The executive floor always felt like a different country. The carpet was thicker, the silence more pronounced. You could hear your own shoes echo against that silence, and today, those echoes felt sharper. A kind of rhythm to a moment I didn't ask for, but wasn't going to avoid. When I reached the glass wall outside the conference room, I stopped. Not just because I was told to wait, but because I needed that second. One last breath before the page turned. Inside, I saw my father seated at the far end of the table, back rigid, arms crossed. My brother stood slightly to the left, near the whiteboard, his expression unreadable, but not unbothered. Several department heads were present, eyes narrowed, voices low but pointed. There was no laughter, just the flat murmur of corporate camouflage. I caught a few words, enough. Access to documentation he shouldn't have had. Not clear who authorized. Risk to procedural integrity. My name wasn't whispered. It was spoken plainly, almost clinically. Like I was a malfunction, not a man. They weren't asking questions. They were shaping a story, one they could control before the facts shaped one of their own. Then, the door opened. "Come in," someone said. I think it was Diane from legal. I stepped inside, closed the door gently behind me, and stood, hands at my sides, spine straight, not across from them, but among them. A choice, not a mistake. No one asked me to sit. No one greeted me. My brother avoided my eyes. He hadn't been avoiding me much lately, until now. That told me more than any accusation could have. My father glanced my way, then looked down at his hands. That glance, brief, bitter, held the weight of every expectation he ever laid at my feet. Then came the shift. The CEO entered, quietly, deliberately. He nodded once to the group, then to me. And for a moment, nothing moved. He didn't start by asking what happened. He started by asking why they assumed it had. "I've reviewed the documentation in question," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "Before I make any determinations, I want to hear how each of you came to your conclusions about Mr. Keller's access, behavior, and role. It wasn't a trap. It was a test. And one by one, they began to fail it. First was Darren, my supervisor. He fumbled through vague references to general concerns and workplace ambiguity. He said things like, "It's more about perception than protocol." Then came Marcia, head of compliance. She leaned on passive phrasing. "It was brought to my attention," and "some team members have noticed." The CEO nodded after each explanation but didn't respond. He just let the weight of their words hang there, words that, when heard aloud, lacked the teeth they'd pretended to have in private. Then he turned to me, but he didn't ask me to defend myself. He asked me nothing. Instead, he reached into a thin manila folder on the table and pulled out a single document, 1 page. He placed it in the center, adjusted it slightly, and spoke. "This is the updated ownership register, effective as of 5 months ago. It was signed off by our board, ratified by our legal team, and reviewed again last week when some inconsistencies were flagged." He paused, let that land. Mr. Keller's shares, held in trust, now account for 17%. That makes him, by definition, a principal stakeholder in this company. Silence. Not the kind that follows confusion. The kind that follows recognition. The kind you can't walk back from. I didn't blink. No one spoke. My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. My brother finally looked at me, his mouth open just slightly, as if halfway to a protest he already knew wouldn't matter. The CEO tapped the document once, gently, like a gavel. "Going forward, any decisions or discussions involving Mr. Keller's position, formal or implied, will require his direct input. This includes departmental oversight, access limitations, and personnel recommendations." Another pause. Then, "Mr. Keller," he said, turning to me now, "you're free to resume your schedule, if you choose." It wasn't a question. I nodded once. And that's when the final blow landed. Quietly, cleanly. The CEO looked at my brother and said, "Ethan, I need you to step outside. We'll follow up with you separately." No anger, no raised voice, just a line drawn with finality. Ethan hesitated. For a second, I thought he'd challenge it, but he didn't. He walked out, slow but steady, his hands stiff at his sides, not a glance back. I stayed. Everyone else sat back down. Papers shuffled, coffee was sipped. But no one looked directly at me, and no one told me to leave. I remained standing for another minute, letting the silence stretch. Not to prove anything, just breathing. It was the kind of quiet you don't rush. My father didn't say a word. His hands stayed clasped in front of him, knuckles pale. He didn't lift his gaze. And yet he saw me. For the first time, not as someone to manage, dismiss, or mold, just as I was. The recognition was there, even if the words weren't. It didn't bring satisfaction, not really. There was no urge to smile, no flicker of "I told you so." What came instead was a strange heaviness, a lifetime of trying to be enough for a man who had already decided what enough looked like, and it had never looked like me. I stepped back from the table slowly and nodded once to the CEO, who gave the kind of nod in return that meant more than it looked. A brief touch on the shoulder from Diane as I walked past. Not dramatic, just human. Outside the conference room, the air felt thinner, lighter, but I wasn't floating. I was grounded, finally. About 10 minutes later, I was asked to join the CEO in his office. Just him. No assistants, no witnesses. The blinds were drawn part way, letting in filtered light from the tall windows behind his desk. He didn't offer a seat. I took one anyway. He leaned forward, fingers steepled. "You were owed better." The sentence came quiet, measured, not for show. I didn't respond right away. He continued, "Your position going forward can be formalized in a few directions. You've earned that choice." He paused, then added, "But don't feel like you have to decide today." I appreciated that. He wasn't handing me a clean slate. He was acknowledging what had always been there and what had finally been seen. Before I left, he said one more thing. Sometimes silence protects. Sometimes it hides. And sometimes, when used wisely, it shifts everything. I didn't nod. I didn't need to. We both understood. As I made my way back to my floor, I passed by the familiar walls and people. They didn't speak. Some turned away. Others offered a neutral glance. It was a strange thing to no longer be invisible, but also not yet included. In the break room, my bag was where I'd left it earlier that morning. I reached inside and pulled out the blue folder, the same one I had hidden, then guarded, then nearly destroyed. My fingers traced the edge of the cover. It felt different now, not heavier, but fuller, not a weapon, just truth. I carried it back upstairs. Inside my father's corner office, the air was colder. No one else was there. He wasn't expected back that day. Maybe not the next either. I walked up to the desk, the same one I used to avoid even looking at when I was younger, afraid of what power looked like up close. I placed the folder dead center, the way he always aligned his paperwork. No note, no explanation, just presence. That folder had been used to question me, doubt me, and nearly erase me. Now I was leaving it behind, not as surrender, but as release. It no longer needed to follow me. My name wasn't in it, it was beyond it. Back in the hallway, I heard footsteps. I turned and saw him, my father, standing at the other end, not approaching, just watching. We stood there for a long second. He didn't speak, and for once, I didn't fill the silence. Instead, I gave him the only answer that mattered. One sentence. I'm going to build something different. That was it. I turned and walked past him. He didn't stop me, didn't nod, but something shifted in his expression. Not approval, not pride, maybe understanding, or maybe just the beginning of it. I took the elevator down alone. The ride was slow, but it felt earned. The lobby was half full when I stepped out. Someone from HR was pretending not to stare. One of the junior analysts offered a quiet, "Hey," like she wasn't sure which script to follow anymore. I smiled back, gently. I pushed open the glass doors. Outside, the early afternoon air was crisp, the kind that bites at your cheeks but clears your head. I paused at the bottom of the steps and caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection on the building's dark windows. For once, I didn't look away. The man staring back wasn't angry. He wasn't waiting to be given anything. He had his name, and that was more than enough. I understand something clearly at last. Being seen isn't the same as belonging, and belonging isn't worth losing yourself. I walked out with my name intact, and that was enough.